literally an island off an island, and it's rare.
Well, Lord Howe is one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Just go look up Lord Howe Island. It's about 500 kilometers east of Sydney. It's technically part of New South Wales, but it's its own thing. And they limit the number of people who can visit the island. And the reason why most Australians don't go is because the flights are expensive. And when I was there, one of the people on the island told me that the secret to going to Lord Howe cheap.
I'm Trizzy.
And I'm Leah.
And this is Ticket to Anywhere podcast, bringing you the gear, tools, and tips to equip you for a travel-filled life.
No matter your travel experience or lack thereof, we aim to be your first stop when you're thinking of where to go, how to get there, what to bring, and what to do.
Catch the latest episode every other Wednesday on YouTube or your favorite listening app.
We'd love to connect with you. Find Ticket to Anywhere on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Pinterest, and LinkedIn.
Oh. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. And I thought Bruny Island was off of Tasmania, so I'm going to need to get to Lord Howe next. Let's look at us. We spend weeks in a place.
True. Yeah, definitely.
Not to say, I mean, our guest today, Gary Arndt, host of Everything Everywhere Daily and very much highly awarded travel photographer, travel journalist, photojournalist. I mean, he's had decades of experience.
Yeah, seriously, he's very seasoned in the travel industry, and it was an honor to have him on and let him talk and teach us everything that he's been everywhere.
Yes. I even think that how he got started in photojournalism and photography and what his gear was and how long ago it was, I think that is such a cool thing to hear as well, and will give anyone who wants to get started in it, you know, some hope, some pointers, and you know, your trajectory could be totally different in a decade if you keep putting your mind to it. So
exactly.
It's really cool to hear his experiences.
Yeah, I think it's always cool to meet somebody that is like an OG traveler before the era of social media and stuff like that.
Yes, especially with the timing of the iPhone coming out in relation to his travels. You got to listen to the episode to hear that. Yeah.
That's true.
So great.
Yeah, so let's jump into our coffee and tea for the episode as well.
Trizzy kind of needs a tea. Trizzy kind of needs a tea right now.
You guys, if you could tell by my voice, I am a little sicky, but I got
real nasally right now.
Exactly, but I do have my tea going on in my Starbucks Cancun cup. It's just an Earl Grey, something to wake me up and soothe my throat a little bit with a little bit of honey.
Okay,
like
I told her to dump honey in it, not a little bit, but I said, I mean, just take the bottle and just.
I can't do that.
If you're not watching, if you're not watching, I'm just chugging the honey bottle.
Yeah, she wanted me to be, you know,
like coat it,
Carey moment.
Coat the whole gargle honey.
I'm not a big fan of honey, but I mean, I'll use it in tea. Yeah.
Oh, really?
I can't have it alone.
It feels so good on your throat, though, especially when it's hurting.
It's all right for me.
I get it, though. Yeah. Well, I'm drinking my little homemade coffee. You know, it's just like my oat milk. It is a roast from Truth Coffee in Cape Town, South Africa. So I hand grinded one of their most famous roasts, and it is one of the most famous coffee shops probably in all of Africa, one of the most awarded. So I was really excited to brew some espresso from there, you know, using my mocha pot and just a little bit of like non-dairy brown sugar creamer from Trader Joe's. I'm so specific with my coffees. Like, does anyone out there make my recipes? Holler at me if you do.
Oh yeah,
that would be an honor.
Tag at LA in flight.
With the dozens of coffees.
You got to show the cup. Where's that cup from?
Oh, this cup is so cute. It's from a local coffee shop called Havana Savannah.
There you go.
It's a little like Easter edition. but super cute. And today we're going to cheers to Gary, lessons in photography and lessons to in visiting over 200 countries and territories around the world. So
Amazing.
cheers to that.
Cheers.
Hey y'all, Trizzy here. I just wanted to give you a heads up that Ticket to Anywhere will not be releasing episodes in the month of July. We are taking a summer break, so we'll see you back in August. Feel free to listen to our past episodes while we're cooking up some new ones, and continue to connect with us on social media. Thanks for your support.
Welcome, Gary. Thank you for being on Ticket to Anywhere. For those of you who haven't seen your incredible and fascinating photography, we'd love for you to tell us in the audience, who are you?
My name is Gary Arndt, and for the purposes of this show, the reason why I'm on is that in 2007, I sold my home to travel around the world, and I thought I would travel around the world for a year or two, and it kind of ended up being 13 years. And until the pandemic hit, literally until like, the week the pandemic kind of brought home, I was traveling. My last international trip, I came home on February 28th, 2020, got COVID the first week of March, um, and saw kind of everything in the travel industry fall apart in the next few weeks. And that's so yeah, I was on the road mostly full time for that entire length of time. Towards the end, I did have an apartment, but I'd still be on the road maybe half of the year traveling. And yeah, so I traveled a lot and been to a lot of places.
What started your travel bug initially?
Boredom. Um, I had started an internet company in the 90s, and I sold that before the dot-com bubble burst, and then I had another business that was hit by the dot-com bubble burst, and then I went back to school, and I realized I had no desire to be an academic, and I didn't know what to do, and so I came up with this idea of traveling around the world. And this was before smartphones. Like, to give you an example, Steve Jobs announced the iPhone a month before I started traveling, and it wasn't on sale until
Wow.
several months after. And even then, the iPhone kind of sucked the first, couple years. So it wasn't like everybody was today with, their phones out taking selfies and that. Um,
Mhm.
the term digital nomad didn't exist,
Mhm.
and so it was a very different environment than, say, people who are traveling today, where Wi-Fi is now ubiquitous. You can work from anywhere.
Mhm.
So I wasn't trying to be a digital nomad. I wasn't trying to work remotely. I was traveling. I was
Mhm.
doing the things that a traveler does and trying to experience new things and new places. And that was, I don't know, kind of different. I don't see a lot of people doing that nowadays. They all go
Mhm.
to live remotely in some place, usually just a few places around the world that draw everybody. And they don't tend to go to a lot of more obscure places.
I have a question for you. I was reading about how you started your blog, to keep people back home updated on your travels when you started in 2007. And then you also picked up a camera, but I'm curious when that journey started. I saw how you picked up a Nikon and then switched to Sony, but when did you actually start taking photos? And then how did that lead into all of the accolades that you've picked up along the way?
So I bought it. So before I started traveling, like a lot of people do, in that phase where you're about to go on the trip but it hasn't started, you plan and fret over things. And one of the things I bought was a camera, a very nice camera, thinking, as many people do, that a nice expensive camera will take good photos. And I learned really quickly, like the first week traveling, that that's not how it works, because I was taking a lot of very bad photos with a very nice camera. And so it began a process of just trying to figure out, how do you take good photos? Why wasn't this camera doing, taking the kind of photos I wanted? And it also had to do with, I had been on the road for about 9 months. I spent basically that entire time crossing the Pacific Ocean, island hopping, uh, Philippines, Japan, South Korea, and I was in Hong Kong at the time. This was around Christmas 2007. And I realized that there weren't many people, reading my website. So I had to figure out, either I should quit doing this. This is a waste of my time, or I could double down and see if I could make something of it, whatever that meant. So I went to a magazine stand and I bought all the travel magazines, I sat down with a spreadsheet. I kind of looked at like, what are in these magazines? What are people, buying them for? And one of the things I realized is that in editorial content, the average number of countries mentioned in every issue was like 34. Most people are not going to 34 countries every month. So probably not even in a lifetime, most people won't do that. So why are they buying travel magazines? And the thing I realized, it was photography, right? This was like a wish book. This was something that was aspirational. And so I started to take photography more seriously, and I started posting a photo every day to my website. And I did that for 8 years straight. And
Wow.
this is before Instagram. So the process of making your images public forced me to be better, because if they weren't good, I would look foolish, and I always had to have photos that were available. And so that's kind of how it started. I never took a course. No one trained me. I never read a book. I just sort of taught myself, and as questions arose, someone online answered them. So
Yeah. I feel that because I'm a self-taught videographer first, and then it led into photography as well. And it's easier to learn when you're just doing it on your own. There's no pressure of being graded, because at the end of the day, your art is your art. And whoever's going to hop
well,
on your art is those are the ones that's going to support you.
I don't know if you know this, but the people that won the Academy Award this year for best editing for Everything Everywhere All at Once, they learned how to do film editing on YouTube, and they won the
100%.
Academy
Yes.
Award. So,
Love that.
the old rules of how you had to learn things, I think, are kind of out the window. And in a lot of ways, figuring out at your own pace and answering questions because there are some things you can just figure out yourself. And there are some things that you may need, okay, I don't understand. And then you go get help. And working at that pace is, I really believe, the best way to do things. And if I had been doing it now, trying to learn photography as opposed to 15 years ago, I think it would be even easier today than it was then, because there are more courses and more things explicitly available explaining everything that I went through.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, a lot more new devices, but definitely a lot of free information out there. Trizzy just put some herself, put some free
Yeah.
info out there how to take a couple of great pictures. So was the intention, Gary, to submit your photography for, awards and see how it went, or
Not at
how did that
first.
come
The
about?
first
Yeah.
was just to take photos that at one day I could hang in my house.
Mhm.
But as I began, as the website became more popular, and I realized that there was this industry out there of travel journalists, and I got to know some of these people, I realized that there were professional benefits to winning some of these awards. And so I did sort of an analysis of what wins awards, and figured it out, and submitted portfolios for several major prizes, and I was kind of successful. And photography competitions are not like the Olympics. It's not like you can time someone running and the fastest person wins. It's very subjective. You get a different panel of judges, you get a completely different outcome. And so a lot of it's just getting your work to a point where it's good, and then throwing stuff against a wall. I have a very good friend of mine. She's a very good photographer, and she was submitting things for the same competition. And I told her, it's like, you are going to win Photographer of the Year one of these years. Your work is that good. And she didn't win. She didn't win. And then she won. And I was like, I told you. It was
Nice.
just a matter of the right year. And it wasn't even necessarily
Wow.
her best work, but that was the year she won. And
Mhm.
that was the same way. The year I won, the first one, Photographer of the Year, I don't think it was my best portfolio. I think I sent in better ones after that, but it was the one that won. So that's kind of how it works.
So 200 countries and counting.
Countries and territories. So the way and let me explain that. So because the normal list of UN countries is 193 plus a couple others, but the problem is the list of countries doesn't really break down the world to a fine enough degree. So if you went, you've probably met people like this. You say, I'm from the United States. Oh, really? I've been to New York. Now, New York's part of the United States, obviously, but there's a whole lot more to the country than just New York.
Oh, yeah.
And that's true of a lot of countries, right? If you've been to
Mhm.
London, you've been to the UK, but there's a lot more to the country. And
Mhm.
so I kind of go by the Traveler Century Club list, which I think
Yep.
their current list is now down to 326 different places. So that includes
Wow.
things like Antarctica. Um, French Polynesia
Mhm.
is technically part of France in the same way that Hawaii is part of the United States. But if you
Okay.
say, I'm going
Yeah.
to France, no one thinks you're going to Tahiti, right? They think you're
Yeah.
going to the
Yeah.
hexagon shaped country in Europe where they eat baguettes and drink wine, not to, the place in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where they eat poisson cru. So
Mhm.
the same with like Puerto Rico or
Yes.
the Falkland Islands, or, I mean, is Puerto Rico part of the United States? Well, yeah, but on the other hand, not quite the same. So it's
Right.
its own thing, right? So they divide the world into finer sections, and on that list, I've been to 203 different countries and territories, which includes countries, but also things that are not traditionally considered countries,
Okay.
territories, and subdivisions of very big country. A good example is Indonesia. Indonesia is, I don't know, many thousand different islands. And,
Hmm.
going to Java is very different than going to Sumatra, which is very different than going to Bali.
Mhm.
Culturally,
Yeah.
Bali is, you know, very different than Java, even though it's close by. So
Hmm.
that's kind of how they look at it. So yeah,
Mhm.
203 on that list, which is kind of the one I go by because I think
Mhm.
it's actually a bit more accurate, and for travel
Oh,
purposes, it says more.
I completely agree. I've accidentally slipped up and called Hawaii its own country
Well, it
before
used to be,
because it's culturally so different
Yeah.
from
right.
mainland United States, right? So much
And it used
Asian
to
and
be its own
Japanese
country,
influence. Yeah.
the
Until
Kingdom of Hawaii, and that's a whole story in and
Mhm.
of itself. But yeah, they have a history that's unlike the rest of the U.S.
Yep. And then next week I'm heading to Puerto Rico for a travel conference, and of course, I don't get a passport stamp, but to me, I'm going to a completely different culture. It's a completely different culture from what I'm used to out here in
Have you been there
California and
before?
LA. I have not. I'm excited.
It's kind of weird because you know how when you normally go to a different country, the signs are like a different font, or
Right.
there's just like those little things that are different. In Puerto
Mhm.
Rico, all the signs are just like what you're going to see on
The
highways in
same.
the U.S.,
Oh,
like the
wow.
speed
Ooh.
limit sign, except it's in Spanish. And
Okay.
so it's kind of like this twilight zone where everything is kind of the same, but it's different.
Different. Yeah.
Mhm.
In the same way, like going to Canada, everything's kind of the same,
Right.
but it's a little different.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I'm hoping the cost of visiting there won't reflect that it's the same as the US, especially since the price of everything is going up at the moment. So, what is maybe a territory or a country that you haven't been to when you tell people it surprises them the most?
Jamaica.
Okay.
I've been to Jamaica.
Jamaica.
It's
Okay.
it's a very popular place to visit. It's not hard to get to. I
Mhm.
just haven't been there. And I've not been to Peru. I haven't been to um what would be another easy one to visit that I haven't been to. There aren't a lot of those left.
Right.
But those are like two big tourist Colombia. I haven't been to Colombia. That's kind of
Oh,
hard to get
okay.
to. Uh,
Case in point, I'm like, "What? You haven't been to Colombia?"
no.
Yeah.
I've been to Ecuador, I think 3 times, but not
Mhm.
Colombia. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, Cuba, Jamaica, Nicaragua are the only countries in like North America that I haven't been to.
Mhm.
Um, I've been to most of the countries in Central Asia, but I've not been to Turkmenistan. Nothing in the Caucasus. I've
Mhm.
not been to Nepal or Bhutan. So there's still quite a bit for me to do. I've been to all the islands in the Pacific, or all the countries in the Pacific. So
Oh,
I've been
wow.
able to. I've been to Nauru. I've been to Tuvalu,
Wow.
Samoa. Uh, yeah,
You've been to Tasmania before also, right, Gary?
yeah. I spent quite a bit of time in Australia, and
Yeah.
been to every state, and took a side trip to Tasmania and visited the forest there, and spent time in Hobart. It was snowing in
Beautiful.
Hobart when I was there.
Yeah, that's one place the other day I was at a travel meetup and I put it as my special place and people are like, "Oh, Tasmania." I'm like, "Yeah, no one I know has been there." So to me it's a special place because it's literally an island off an island and
There's
it's
a
rare.
lot in Australia that people everyone kind of sticks to the East Coast. Like there's
Mhm.
between say Melbourne, Sydney, and then maybe up to Brisbane. That's where all the tourism takes place. But it's a very big country, and I don't think people realize how big it is. So if like I drove from Darwin to Perth, and I drove
Wow.
from the equivalent of Melbourne all the way up to Port Douglas on the
Mhm.
east. So I mean, I've really explored the country. And the other thing is I went to is Lord Howe Island. Most
Yeah, I've never heard
Australians
of
have
it.
never been to. Well, Lord Howe is one of the most beautiful places on earth. Just go look
Ooh.
up Lord Howe Island. It's about 500 kilometers east of Sydney. It's technically part of New South Wales, but it's its own thing. And they limit the number of people who can visit the island. And the reason why most Australians don't go is because the flights are expensive. And when I
Mhm.
was there, one of the people on the island told me that the secret to going to Lord Howe cheap is that if you're flying to Australia, bundle in a ticket to Lord Howe as part of your international ticket, and you can do it
Mm.
super cheap. And yeah, it's a real special place that if you're not Australian, most people don't even know about it.
Yeah.
But I know
Wow.
several extremely well traveled people, probably better traveled than I am, who say that Lord Howe is what they think is the most beautiful place on earth.
Wow. And I thought Bruny Island was off of Tasmania, so I'm gonna need to get to Lord Howe next.
If you go to Australia, definitely do it. But also, just there's so much in the interior of the country, on the
Yeah.
west coast. I got to go whale shark diving off the Ningaloo Reef. I did the pier dive in Exmouth, which was an old U.S. naval base that they go diving there. Uh, just some amazing stuff. In Shark Bay,
Mhm.
you can see stromatolites, which are some of the oldest living creatures on Earth. They're basically just rocks, but they're bacterial mats. Um, and most people never see that part of Australia.
Mhm. How
Yeah.
long do you usually spend in a country or in a continent, I should say, sorry?
It depends.
Mm.
So when I first started traveling, for the first several years, it was all kind of one linear thing.
Mm.
And then eventually I kind of got to a point where I was moving around a lot more. As the website became more popular, I was invited to more things, and I would literally, I had one period in 2011 where I went to all 7 continents in 9 months,
Wow.
and that was uh, I didn't plan it. It just kind of worked out that way because I went to
Yeah.
Antarctica and then I ended up doing these other things, and that's kind of how it happened. So how long I spend really depends.
Okay.
At the start of my travels, I spent probably a month and a half in Vietnam, a similar amount of time in China, several months in Australia, just because it
Mhm.
was so big. Um, I spent one day in Macau, but I kind of felt one day was all Macau really needed. It's not huge.
Mhm.
I took the first ferry over from Hong Kong, explored almost the entire city on foot, and took
Mhm.
the last ferry home. And I'd go
It's a
back
good way to
again,
do
but
it.
it's not like I think uh, scrimped on visiting Macau.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's amazing. Wow.
What are some of the even just one thing, what's one of the most surprising things you've learned about your 203, countries and territories throughout all these
The, wor-
years?
the world is really big.
Huge.
Um, when I first started traveling and I was preparing to leave, I bought books. I got 1,000 places to see before you die and all this stuff. And I want to
Mhm.
go here. I want to go there. And then when you actually get on the road, the amount of stuff there is to see and the scale of the earth, it becomes kind of overwhelming. And all the original plans I had for what I could see in even a year, there was
Mm.
no way I could possibly do it. And if I
Mhm.
could do it, it would be so exhausting to run to everything that it wouldn't be worthwhile.
Mhm.
And there's also a lot more out there than just the wonder of the world type of attractions. I'm
Yep.
sure you're real familiar with the problem of over tourism. And the problem
Yes.
Yes.
is it's too many. It's not that there are too many tourists, it's that there are too many
Mhm.
tourists visiting the same place at the same time.
Yep.
And the example I always use is Venice. Venice gets tens of millions of visitors to a point where it's almost really kind of hurting the city because everybody knows about Venice. They've seen the
Mhm.
gondolas and the bridges and the canals. 20 minutes away by train from Venice is the city of Padua. Almost nobody visits Padua, yet they
Mm.
have one of the largest public squares in Europe. They have the oldest botanical garden in the world, one of the oldest universities. It's home of the Scrovingni Chapel, which was kind of a precursor to the Sistine Chapel. They have all this amazing stuff, and most people don't even know to visit, let alone not visiting. And there are wonderful places like this all over the world that just don't capture people's attention, so they don't even know to go.
Mhm.
And I get people that ask me for travel advice all the time. Like, let's say they want to go to the Caribbean. And I'm like, all right, I already know where you're thinking of going. You're thinking of Jamaica. You're thinking of maybe St. Martin or St. Lucia. Those are kind of the big islands. And the reason why these islands are so popular is because very large airplanes can land there.
Mm.
Okay.
My favorite island in the Caribbean is Dominica. Dominica is the least visited country in the Western Hemisphere. And the reason
Oh,
is not
wow.
that it's a bad country. The reason is it's so mountainous, they can't put a large runway. And because they can't put a
Oh.
large runway, they don't get the big planes, which means people just don't bother because it takes one extra bit of work to take a ferry or a small plane to get from St. Lucia or Guadeloupe to Dominica. And so people don't
Yeah.
bother doing it, even though it's really one of the best places in the Caribbean. And there are fantastic places in the Pacific.
Mm.
When people tell me it's always Tahiti or Bora Bora because that's all they know.
Yeah.
Where
Mhm.
if I say, well, if you go to Samoa, there's this amazing thing, or the Cook Islands are great, and go to Rarotonga, and they just don't know about those places because they have this in their
Mhm.
mind. They saw it in a book or a magazine, and that's what they got their heart set on. And I think one of the biggest things you can do if you're creating travel content is just to let people know about these other places.
Yeah.
Um, I have a good working relationship with the people at the tourist office of Spain, and they'll be the first to tell you Barcelona does not need any help getting tourists. They're good. It's
Yeah.
the other places in Spain that need the help. And every country will say this. London doesn't
Mhm.
need any more visitors. They need
Right.
visitors in Bath or in Manchester or Liverpool or places like that people don't necessarily go.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah. Trizzy
Yep.
just got back from Bath.
Yeah, I went to Bath and I thought it was I spent just a day trip there and I wish I stayed overnight. There's so much more to do once I set foot in the city and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this place is amazing and I wish I spent more time there than I did in London." So, yeah. It's funny that you say that tourism needs more in like the smaller areas because Leah and I recently went to the travel and adventure show this past February and I saw a lot of smaller towns of Japan in the
Mhm.
Japan area. I was like, I've never heard of these cities, and now I really want to go and discover them and kind of just be in the area that's less touristy.
Yeah.
Uh, there are major cities in Japan, and they're all connected by the Shinkansen, and it's very easy to get around in Japan. One of the first places I went in Japan was an island known as Yakushima. Yakushima is located in the far south of Japan. It was the inspiration for the movie Princess Mononoke. It is a cedar forest on the top of a mountain up in the clouds. It's absolutely
Mhm.
beautiful. And I was the only foreigner there that I ever met.
Wow.
And because most people just don't know about it. And
Mhm.
yeah, so that's everyone goes to Tokyo, and there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with Tokyo. It's a great place, but yeah,
Mhm.
there's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Even at the Travel and Adventure Show, I didn't realize there was a booth for Samoa and American Samoa. And I'm not going to lie, up until February 2023, I didn't know they were two different things.
Oh,
I
they're
had no
very different.
idea.
Well,
Yeah.
when I say they're very different, I should say they're very close to each other, and
Mhm.
culturally and linguistically, it's the same.
Mhm.
It's a, it was the early 20th century. One was colonized by Germany, and the Americans got the other one, and then World War One happened, and then the New Zealand
Mhm.
took it over, and then one of them became independent, and the other one is still a U.S. territory. And
Oh, okay.
they've actually gotten further apart in the recent years, because it used to be Samoa was the westernmost point, kind of closer to the international date line. But because they're culturally and economically tied to Australia and New Zealand, they moved the international
Oh.
date line to between American Samoa and Samoa, even though they're not very far apart. So now they're in
Mhm.
completely different days. And then the
Wow.
nation of Samoa went and became one of the only countries in the world to move from driving on the right to driving on the left, so that their
Oh.
cars were more akin to the cars in New Zealand and
Yep.
Australia. So now they're in different days. They drive on the different side of the road. They play completely different sports. You'll find a lot of very good pro
Mm.
football players coming out of American Samoa. If you
Mhm.
ever follow professional wrestling, The Rock, Roman Reigns, there's a huge Samoan contingent of professional wrestlers. Their families all come
Mhm.
from American Samoa.
Oh,
Rugby
wow.
players all come from the nation of Samoa, known as Western
Mhm.
Samoa. But if you ever get the opportunity, definitely go. And if you live on the West Coast, do you live in like the LA area, Southern California?
Yep.
Yeah.
Los Angeles, yep.
I assume that they still have this, but there used to be, and I assume there still is, a direct flight from LA to Nandi in Fiji. And you
Ooh.
leave in the evening, you arrive in the morning in Fiji around 6 a.m. And the time difference isn't too bad. And there's a boat you can take up and down the chain of islands called the Yasawa Islands on the western coast. And there's like 30 little villages run by local, or resorts run by local villages. These are not necessarily upscale, but for a very little amount of money, you can have your own bungalow right next to the beach, all
Wow.
three meals
Wow.
included. And it's
Wow.
a fantastic experience. And because it's all run by the local villages, they keep the money. It benefits them,
Oh,
and
nice.
That's great.
it's an incredible experience. And I always tell people from California that, because it's almost the same distance of going to the Caribbean, or if you
Yeah.
want to fly down to
Oh,
Cancun,
okay.
it's a little
Yep.
bit longer, but not so long that I think it should deter people. And they
Yep.
speak English.
Maybe. Yeah.
Their currency's tied to the US dollar. Easy to get around.
It's easy.
Yep.
Yeah. That's how I think the flights may have stopped during the pandemic, the direct ones, but I'm pretty sure they started back up again. I was talking to Fiji Airways at Travel and Adventure Show, and actually I had asked them how do they, and I would love to ask you the same question about certain nations, certain territories. I asked them, how do they combat the myth that Fiji from the US is too hard to get to, it takes too long, there's no direct flights, etc. So they're able to answer that, at least by getting to LA, there's direct flights. But when you mentioned Dominica is your favorite country in the Caribbean, and people, it's one of the least, it's the least traveled country in the Western Hemisphere, because people don't want to take the extra ferry ride to get there, or the plane ride. A lot of people say that about the Philippines as well, which is where my family comes from. And I spent a month there traveling around, and I loved it, but I was willing to jump on the planes, jump on the boats, and take an hour extra to get where I wanted to go. But a lot of people say they don't want to travel when they're traveling Southeast Asia. They don't want to go to the Philippines because it's too much work.
Hmm.
What kind
I
of
don't know why the Philippines would be any more work than going to Bangkok or
right?
Vietnam. I mean, if anything, it's a little bit shorter flight, and they got connections from Guam. They got connections from Japan. It's
Hmm.
closer, if anything, and it's easier to get around in the Philippines because
Hmm.
English is more widely spoken.
Yes.
I've never had a problem. I went around like northern Luzon. I went up to Baguio and Banawe and
Wow.
Vigan, and those areas. I never had any problem. And let's face it, a lot of people when they go to Bangkok, they're not traveling around the north of the country. They're going to
No.
Bangkok. They're going to Chiang Mai. They're going to a couple beach resorts down in the south
Hmm.
that focus. No one goes to Udantani. I did, but not many people are doing that. Um, there's just no tourist infrastructure there. The same
Mhm.
with rural parts of Cambodia. If you're not going to Siem Reap or Phnom Penh or maybe some areas now on the coast, that's kind of it. But yeah, I think the Philippines, and especially there are so many islands that
Mhm.
have I think Cebu gets a lot of attention, but I have a friend who's a travel blogger, and he lives in the Philippines now. His wife is Filipino. Just opened up a dive shop on one of the islands, and is encouraging more people. And it's not one of the better known islands, but uh, yeah, it's just taking that one extra step.
To
And like,
paradise, right?
and to be honest, Manila's not even my favorite city. I think it's kind
Oh,
of,
We can
not a fan.
agree.
Yes, we're not fans.
but there's a lot of places like that where it's like, yeah, just get out of the city and go somewhere else, and then it's great.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you'll
Mhm.
find a very different experience. Papua New Guinea, I found, was like that. Port Moresby is one of the worst cities in the world, but
Oh,
literally
okay.
30 minutes outside of town, it's a different world, completely different
Okay.
world. And that's all you have to do.
Mhm.
Or go to the go up to the Highlands in the main island, or I went up to New Britain, went scuba diving, uh, completely different world. And
Mhm.
I would certainly not judge a lot of these countries based on their, mega capital city. Jakarta is another
Right.
example where
Mhm.
it's kind of, almost too much. But if you just get out of Jakarta and go anywhere else, you know, it's a lot better. And I'd say the same with New York and Los Angeles as well. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yes, lucky to live in Southern California in general. So, we're a travel essentials podcast, tools, tips, and gear, basically to give advice to those who want to try to go anywhere their heart desires. So, you talk about places people are scared to go, generally places that don't have a strong tourist infrastructure. So, what would be some practical advice you could give to someone who wants to kind of break out of their comfort zone and try somewhere that's maybe not as developed, or they don't speak a language that you're familiar with? I feel like I'm in that zone as well, where
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, I'd love to start exploring more. How can I do it comfortably, safely,
Yeah.
etc.?
it is a skill that is all about that you develop over time. And it's just a matter of becoming comfortable as you're traveling. I've been to a lot of places, but the first place I visited, 2007, I flew from LA to Hawaii. I flew from Hawaii to Tahiti. I land in Tahiti, and everyone speaks French. I don't speak French. And it was very intimidating. Today, you put me in that same environment, yeah, I don't care. I'll, get on a bus, and I realize that it's you can communicate. What do you need to communicate when you're on a bus? I want to travel somewhere on the bus. How much is it? That's really all there
Mhm.
is. If you walk into a restaurant, you're there to eat. And I've had experiences where I've walked into restaurants and we couldn't communicate, but they knew I was there to eat, and they served me something, and it was pretty good, and mission
Mhm.
accomplished.
Mhm.
So yeah, even if you've never traveled internationally, go anywhere to start, to realize that it's safe to travel. In fact, a lot of places are far safer than the United States.
Yes.
If it makes you feel better, if you want to go to a place where they don't speak English but you can still get around, go somewhere like Sweden. Everybody in
Mhm.
Sweden speaks English, almost literally everyone. Or go to the Netherlands. Um, you will, even if you try to learn their language, they will stop and just speak English because it's going to be a lot easier for everybody
Yep.
to get along. And they will usually speak it better than most people in the United States. So places like that. If you wanted to go to Asia, you could get the same experience going to Singapore or to Malaysia.
Mhm.
You'll find English is widely spoken by pretty much everyone in both countries. Won't be a problem getting around. And that's kind of how I would start. Pretty much traveling anywhere in Europe, traveling places like Singapore, Malaysia, and Asia, uh,
Mhm.
South Korea. These are developed countries. You don't have to worry about crime or anything else, and they're safe places to visit. And start by doing that. And once you're just used to being on the road and used to those kind of
Mhm.
things, you realize that a lot of these places are not that exotic. That Samoa is not this distant land in a far off place. It's a place you can just go on Expedia and buy a ticket to. And most of the world is like that.
Mhm.
Um, Occasionally there are visa issues. Maybe you got to apply for something beforehand, but that's becoming less and less. I remember when I went to Central Asia, I had to jump through all these hoops to get a visa for Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And then like a month before I arrived, they got rid of their visa requirements and you just could show up and get it at the airport.
Wow.
Oh.
And I was like, oh crap. I went through all this trouble and I did the same thing in Brazil. Americans used to had to get a
Yes.
visa for Brazil. And I was in Iguazu Falls in Argentina and I wanted to go to the other side of the border. So I spent all this money to get the visa. I go to the consulate in Iguazu and I pay all the money. 2 weeks later, they announce Americans don't need a visa anymore.
Wow. I think we were in Brazil at around the same time, Gary, because that happened to me. I was literally in Iguazu Falls getting my visa for Brazil on the Argentine side. And I stayed there a few days to get it. And then a few months later, the same year, though, they were like, never mind, Americans don't need a visa to Brazil. Like, I spent all the money and time.
But, you know, I mean, a U.S. passport is one of the best passports you can have in terms of travel and not needing a visa to most countries. So that shouldn't get in the way. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you just have to do it. You have to buy a plane ticket. You need to get your passport and you just need to go somewhere. And you're not going to die. You're not going to get kidnapped. You know, you don't need to worry about these things, especially if you're in a tourist area. They tend to be rather safe. And go and enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
And once you've done it the first time and you've broken the ice, it's going to be a lot easier for you to go a second time.
Definitely. I think that's a fantastic note to wrap up on.
Should we jump into the T2A Q2A though? The ticket to anywhere quick to answer segment, which is just rapid fire. And the first one is name a gear that changed your trips. Like you realize like this is the gear that I absolutely need with me.
Oh, the one thing you need to travel with you that really is the only thing you need is a smartphone. Because with this, if you have a smartphone with things like Apple Pay and Google Pay, you can pay for everything. You can book your rooms. You can translate. You can pull up a map. You can, in some cases, even when you're, say, entering the U.S., you can use it as your passport if you use one of those kiosks. So it is the single most important thing. And that's the biggest thing that's changed since I started traveling is the importance of that. And if you have an international roaming plan, you can obviously, you don't need a phone to travel, but it certainly makes things, it's like doing it on cheat mode. It makes life so easy.
Yeah.
And you need to have some sort of roaming plan with that in order to obviously have internet access.
That's perfect. I love that answer. Everyone says don't get addicted to your phones, but here we are. This is the one thing you need on your trips.
It's a tool. I'm not saying you should be posting to TikTok constantly. In fact, I don't even have TikTok on my phone. That is a conscious decision. But as far as the usefulness and the utility you can get from it, there's nothing that's even close.
Okay, next one. What is something or somewhere you experienced that was completely different from what you thought it would be?
I don't usually have a lot of preconceived ideas before I go to a place, so I usually can't be too disappointed. I would say if I have to give an answer, it would be Albania. Albania always is the butt of jokes in Europe, and they have this reputation for being backwards and, oh, Albania, my wife has a mule or something like that. And I didn't find it at all to be backwards or anything like that. I found it to be kind of like the rest of Europe. I don't think it's the richest country in Europe, but it was certainly not a backwards country, and especially in the capital city. So yeah, I'll go with Albania.
Cool.
Great.
Okay, for the last one, this is one of my favorite T2A Q2A questions to ask, but do you have any rituals or routines upon your arrival?
First thing I'll do in a hotel room is take a shower because I've probably been on a plane or, something else. And depending on when I arrive, I will usually then go walk around the block and figure out where is around what I'm staying. Because a lot of times your door to the hotel opens onto a certain street, and you will oh, there's a restaurant there, a convenience store there,
Mm-hmm.
and that becomes kind of your universe for the next couple
Mhm.
days of places where you can get food and whatnot. But it also
Yeah.
may be that there's a back door to the hotel or something around the corner on a side street that's really cool, and you may completely miss that. If you don't actually, maybe walk around the block and do it in a bit more of a two-dimensional area than just, the one dimension on the street you're on. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the thing I do is I walk around and just sort of take in everything and look at, potential things to photograph or figure out what's in the neighborhood.
It's perfect.
Nice. I love that.
Thank
Yeah. Gary, are you mainly a solo traveler or do you travel with groups? Like, what's your preferred way of traveling?
The vast majority of my travel has been by myself, although I have
Nice.
traveled with friends on occasion, and I've done some group tours when you kind of have to do a group tour. There
Hmm.
are some
Yep.
places where if you want to experience, if you want to go to the Galapagos Islands, if you want to go to Antarctica, you can't do that solo.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So, but by and large, it was either travel solo or don't travel. So I just went on my own.
There you go. That's amazing. Well, let everybody know where they could find you and if you have anything coming up and where we can catch you.
You can catch me every single day on my podcast, which is Everything Everywhere Daily. It's not a travel show per se, it's kind of an educational podcast, but most of the things I talk about were based on things I learned while traveling.
Mhm.
So I like to call it travel adjacent. And
Love it.
it's a daily show. So every day I'm putting out a new episode, and you can learn something brand new every day.
That's amazing. Thank you, Gary. We appreciate all
Great.
your knowledge that you've blessed us with on this episode.
Thanks,
Thanks for having
Gary.
me.
We wouldn't be anywhere without the support you've given us, and for that, we're always appreciative. To support the podcast even further with just a $2 donation, head to buymeacoffee.com/ticket to anywhere.
To be the first to get our episodes, subscribe to Ticket to Anywhere on YouTube.
Share this episode with a friend if you found it helpful.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Listen to Ticket to Anywhere wherever you get your podcasts.